My wife was getting ready with a meticulousness that made no sense for a simple Sunday outing. A tight dress, heels she wouldn't even wear to family gatherings, an excessive amount of expensive perfume. She didn't say where she was going, only that she was meeting some friends to celebrate Mother's Day. But when the black SUV pulled up in front of the house, and I saw the man waiting for her, a very muscular guy from the gym I'd seen a couple of times around the neighborhood, I understood that none of this was a coincidence. She got into the vehicle without looking at me, as if she knew I was frozen behind the window, watching her every move. That was the moment I felt something tear inside me, a dry rip that doesn't scream, but only burns. I went down to the basement because I needed to record what was happening. For years, I'd kept a notebook for everything related to my architectural projects and contracts. Now, I decided it would become my personal work log, where every detail of her betrayal would be written down. I noted the exact time the SUV arrived, the clothes she was wearing, even the license plate I managed to glimpse. This wasn't about venting. It was about building a case file that had just begun. As I wrote, the silence of the house hit me harder than any shout. Not 10 minutes had passed when I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was my 17-year-old daughter, her face etched with the burden of a secret held for too long. She asked if I knew about her mother. I stayed silent, waiting. That's when she told me. She had seen the messages on her mother's phone, which she'd left in the kitchen once while showering. My daughter couldn't resist the temptation to look. Messages with photos, vulgar words, and plans for their meetups. But that wasn't the worst of it. She told me those messages had been forwarded, with no trace erased, to my own brother's phone. Her voice trembled as she explained that the conversations included explicit photos of the lover and even comments from my brother, laughing, giving advice, as if he were part of the whole charade. She didn't know what to do with that information. She was afraid her mother would blame her if she spoke up. I didn't know what to say. I just added it to the notebook. Asterisk daughter confirms messages forwarded to brother, photos included. Each word was a dagger, but I needed to document it, like an architect drawing the blueprint of a building's collapse. I went back up to the living room. The house still smelled of the perfume she'd left behind. I lit a cigarette, though I hadn't smoked in years. I sat at the table and dialed my brother's number. When he answered, his voice was agitated, like someone who knows something is wrong. He didn't offer any long excuses, just said he was at the gym, that I shouldn't get involved in adult matters, and hung up. That tone confirmed everything my daughter had said. He was in on it. He knew about the affair and had endorsed it. He didn't scream his innocence or ask me to calm down. He just hid behind his cynicism. I sat there, the cigarette burning down in the ashtray and the notebook open in front of me, feeling that the house was no longer a home, but a stage for deceit. Mother's Day was supposed to be a celebration, but for me, it became the day I buried the woman with whom I had shared half my life. There were no more doubts, only one path forward: to keep writing, to keep gathering evidence, and to prepare for what was to come. Because that ride in the SUV wasn't a fleeting adventure. It was the beginning of a demolition that I myself was going to document, brick by brick. The next morning, I went straight to my brother's workshop. I didn't try to be subtle or sugarcoat my words. I asked him outright if he knew about my wife's relationship with that guy from the gym. He smiled, that smug smirk I'd always known, and launched into a speech that turned my stomach. He talked about modern marriages, about how you have to accept that women need adventures too, and that my reaction was just the jealousy of an insecure man. I listened, but a certainty was boiling inside me. He wasn't defending my wife, he was defending himself. The shameless way he offered his opinion was proof enough that he was more involved than he was admitting. I didn't want to argue with him anymore because I understood that every word I said would only give him more ground. Instead, I called a private investigator, a cold woman of few words who had previously worked on shady real estate fraud cases. I asked her to start investigating on three fronts: my wife's routine at the gym, the finances she had been moving in our joint accounts, and my brother's side businesses. I gave her photos, schedules, and even copies of documents. I told her I needed results fast because my life was falling apart, and she promised me she would have something solid within days. Meanwhile, the public shaming began to brew. On the construction site, the workers murmured. In the neighborhood, the neighbors made comments disguised as jokes. Everyone seemed to know that my wife was sleeping with some guy from the gym, except me. It was a silent hell, the kind of humiliation that isn't shouted in your face but felt in every glance. One afternoon, at the town bar, the lover showed up. He walked in, chest puffed out, ordering beers as if he owned the place. The worst part came when he started talking loudly, boasting about how he was sleeping with the architect's wife. Some people laughed, others pretended to be distracted, but everyone was listening. I remained silent, my jaw clenched, a glass in my hand. I didn't react because I knew that if I stood up, all I would accomplish was giving him a show. Instead, I discreetly turned on my phone's recorder. I recorded every word, every laugh, and every mocking gesture. He said my last name as if it were a punchline, described my wife in bed in a filthy tone, and the others celebrated him. That recording became my first real piece of evidence against him. He didn't know it, but that night, he had signed his own sentence. When I got home, I went up to the basement and stuck a post-it note on the cover of the notebook. Asterisk proof, #1, audio from the bar. Lover confirms relationship, mocks me publicly. I saved it in a separate folder, with copies in the cloud and on a USB drive hidden in the garage. I promised myself I wouldn't confront my wife yet. I needed more. I needed to let the trap set itself while she believed I was still blind. The humiliation was unbearable, yes, but what was at stake was not just my pride. It was my business, my daughter, and my name. And for that, I was going to play this game with surgical patience. The investigator delivered. One morning, she called and asked to meet at a discreet cafe. She arrived with a thick folder, printed photos, and a pen drive. She showed me images of my wife entering and leaving the gym at hours when she claimed to be in work meetings. There were bank records revealing hidden transfers from our joint account to a card she managed to secret. And the most damning part, invoices and contracts signed by my brother, linked to the same gym where the lover trained. It was a network, woven with precision, where everyone played a part. I felt a deep disgust, but also a new clarity. I had legal weapons to start dismantling their theater. My first step was to go to the police station with the recording from the bar. The lawyer I hired advised me to request a restraining order. It wasn't easy, but with the audio of the lover bragging about being with my wife, plus the photos the investigator had obtained, the judge granted it. Knowing that man was forbidden from approaching my family was a momentary relief, though it wouldn't last long. From there, I moved to the professional front. I contacted the human resources department at the company where my wife worked. I gave them copies of the evidence and pointed out that she had been using company time for her encounters. Her suspension was immediate, and weeks later, she was fired. I didn't stop there. I went through our accounts with a fine-tooth comb. For years, we had shared cards and savings, but while I was investing in our work, she had been siphoning money to finance her luxuries and, as I now understood, to support her lover. I called the bank and froze everything in her name. Then I transferred our savings to personal accounts under my sole control. That night, when she tried to withdraw money and her card was declined, her face contorted in a way I will never forget. She feigned surprise, but her eyes screamed fear. I said nothing. I just watched as the castle she had built with lies began to crumble. With my brother, the game was different. Through the investigator, I discovered he had shell companies in his name, with rigged contracts with the city council, inflated bid documents, permits with forged signatures, and payments coming out of public budgets, all linked to the construction project we were developing together. I understood then that my wife had been just a pawn on a much larger board. My brother had financed the lover, placed him in her path to distract me while he diverted funds and positioned himself to take over my projects. This gave me a purpose greater than marital revenge. This was a war, familial, corporate, and legal. That night, I returned to the basement and opened the work log. In large letters, I wrote, asterisk, Operation Demolition asterisk. Below, I listed the steps already taken. Asterisk, restraining order granted. Work suspension in progress. Joint accounts frozen. I closed the cover and stared at the concrete walls, thinking about what was to come. I wasn't crying or shaking. It was something else. A tense calm, the kind that precedes a storm. The betrayal was no longer just a private matter. It was a crime I was going to expose with every document, every piece of evidence, and every trap I set. My wife still believed she could save face, but I had already decided that not one stone would be left standing. She was the first to break. One afternoon, she sat across from me in the kitchen, her eyes swollen from crying. She admitted she had made a mistake, that she should never have let it go so far, that what we had was worth more than any affair. But her words fell apart as soon as she added that she couldn't leave the lover, because that would be a sign of weakness. In that moment, I recognized my brother's influence. He had gotten into her head, convincing her that if she broke it off, she would look like a submissive woman, incapable of maintaining her newfound independence. It wasn't love, it was indoctrination. And watching her repeat those hollow phrases gave me the certainty that I was no longer speaking to my wife, but to a puppet. The situation escalated quickly. One night, the lover showed up at our door, defying the restraining order. He swaggered in, trying to provoke me. My daughter, instead of hiding, stood in front of him with her phone in her hand. She played a recording she had made in secret. In it, you could hear the man bragging to his friends about sleeping with a married woman, describing in lurid detail how he laughed at her naive husband. The silence in the room was brutal. The lover tried to snatch the phone from her, but my daughter held it firm and shouted that he was a coward. He had no choice but to leave, slamming the door in a rage. That act from my daughter showed me that she was understanding everything with a maturity I hadn't imagined. While her mother allowed herself to be manipulated, she was gathering evidence, observing, resisting. That night, I told her I was proud of her, though inside it pained me to know she had been forced to grow up so fast because of the rottenness of adults. We saved that recording together, another nail in the lover's coffin, and by extension, my brother's. The difference was clear. While they were trying to drown us in lies, we were weaving the truth with every document, every audio file, every testimony. My wife, on the other hand, was falling apart. She began to wander through the house like a ghost, avoiding my gaze and taking refuge in phone calls with my brother. She thought he was advising her, when in reality, he was just using her as a piece on his board. I would overhear her repeating phrases that were not her own. Asterisk. You have to be strong. Don't give in. If he doesn't forgive you, it's because he's weak. It was pathetic. A woman who had destroyed her marriage but didn't have the courage to admit that her decision hadn't been her own, but that she had been manipulated to distract me from a larger fraud. The lover had used her as a trophy, my brother as bait, and only now was she beginning to sense it. The night everything finally shattered was different. She burst into my study, crying, with her phone in her hand. She had gone through the messages and discovered what I already knew. Her own brother-in-law had been paying her lover. She read the texts between them, where they talked about keeping up the charade and the $2,000 a month he was receiving to seduce her. She collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands. I couldn't tell if she was crying for me, for herself, or for the sheer absurdity of it all. The only thing I felt was an icy relief. At last, she understood. She hadn't been loved or respected, only used. And for someone as proud as her, that was a blow harder than any divorce. I decided to attack where it would hurt them most, the money. With the documents the investigator had given me, I drafted a detailed complaint against my brother. I included photos of poorly laid foundations at the construction site, permits with forged signatures, and duplicated invoices. I submitted everything to OSHA and the city's Office of Urban Planning. It didn't take long for the inspectors to arrive, shutting down the construction and forcing the workers to evacuate. In a matter of hours, the fraud went from being a hallway rumor to a public fact. The local press pounced on the story. Asterisk architect investigated for corruption in municipal project. My brother's name was stained across the front page of the newspaper. The lover, cornered by the restraining order and without my brother's protection, tried to flee. I followed him to the pier, where I saw him loading a boat with briefcases full of cash and a laptop I instantly recognized from my wife's company. I called the police while recording him with my phone. The patrol cars arrived within minutes. They arrested him right there, with the evidence in his hands. The money, the computer, and even fake passports were confiscated. That video became the final piece that sank him. He wasn't just an adulterer, he was a thief. At the same time, my wife's company proceeded with her dismissal. The recording from the bar, the photographs taken during work hours, and the laptop found in her lover's possession had sealed her fate. Human Resources sent an official notice: immediate termination for gross misconduct and professional negligence. In a matter of days, she went from a respected executive to an unemployed pariah. Her circle of friends, the very ones who had encouraged her adventures, began to distance themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a scandal that was already making the news. My brother, in his desperation, tried to bribe the investigators to halt the process. But it was too late. The investigation had escalated to the federal level. The rigged contracts with the city council came to light. Inflated prices, fixed bids, and payments that ended up in his shell corporations. Some council members, seeing the risk of going down with him, started leaking information to the press to save themselves. They left him isolated, the public face of corruption. His partners turned their backs on him, his accounts were frozen, and his properties were seized. The empire he had built on deceit was collapsing like an avalanche. Meanwhile, I continued to write in my notebook. Each page was an inventory of ruins: the wife without a job or a reputation, the lover behind bars, the brother under federal investigation. The strange thing was, I felt no euphoria, no sense of vengeance fulfilled. It was something else, a cold peace, like the one you feel watching a demolition crew bring down a building exactly as planned. Everything was falling, brick by brick, and I was simply the engineer who had calculated the collapse. I knew the final blow was yet to come, the trap that would expose everything irreversibly. I sold the house without telling anyone, leaving my wife with a suitcase in her hand and my brother surrounded by lawyers who couldn't stop the flood of lawsuits against him. I moved with my daughter to a discreet hotel, and from there, I prepared the final move. Using a burner phone, I sent a message to each of them. I made my wife believe her lover needed to see her to settle accounts. I told my brother that a partner wanted to hand over documents before the feds could get them. And to the lover's cousin, I said there was a pending payment waiting for him. The meeting point, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I arrived before everyone else and hit a cell phone with an open, silent call to 911. Its microphone recording everything. I waited in the shadows. My brother entered first, nervous, scanning the place. Then my wife, her face a mask of despair, as if she still hoped to find her lover and demand an explanation. Finally, the cousin appeared, a thin man with a folder under his arm. It took only half an hour of arguing for the truth to surface. My brother, confident that no one was listening, confessed what he had been planning for months. He had embezzled municipal pension funds. He had paid the lover $2,000 to seduce my wife and keep me distracted. It was all a play to take over my business. My wife stood frozen. Hearing that she had been treated like a paid job shattered her more than any insult. Her hands trembled. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. The lover's cousin just nodded, as if it were all perfectly normal. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let the theater play out until the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. The police burst into the warehouse, flashlights cutting through the darkness, weapons raised. The phone I had left recording handed them the confessions on a silver platter. There was no escape. Handcuffs clicked shut on their wrists. Stunned faces in a sepulchral silence. As they pushed my brother toward the patrol car, he looked at me. He gave me a twisted smile, as if he still believed he was in control of something. My wife, however, searched my face with a pleading gaze, but I did nothing. There was nothing left to save, only ruins. She understood then that we were no longer a marriage, that whatever we had died the day she got into that SUV. Now, all that remained were charges, documents, and a file that marked her as a passive accomplice in a farce. Leaving the warehouse, I took a deep breath. The night was cold, but I didn't feel the wind. I could only hear the echo of my own footsteps and the distant sound of the police cars driving away. There were no shouts, no recriminations, no excuses. Everything had been said. The truth was now preserved in recordings, reports, and court records. What I had written in my notebook had been fulfilled, line by line, like a demolition blueprint executed with precision. When I returned to the hotel, my daughter was waiting up for me. I told her just enough, without embellishment. She didn't cry. She just nodded and hugged me tightly. That night, for the first time in months, we both slept peacefully. I knew there was still a long road ahead, but the essential work was done. The trap had worked. The curtain had fallen. The following days were a whirlwind of headlines and legal procedures. My brother's last name was plastered across newspapers and news channels. Architect accused of million-dollar fraud in public works. They showed him in handcuffs, walking into the courthouse. His partners denied everything. The council members pointed their fingers, and every new leak buried him deeper. The lover remained in preventive detention, charged with theft, extortion, and violating a court order. My wife, for her part, lost her job for good. The company issued a statement making an example of her, clarifying that they would not tolerate such conduct. In our old neighborhood, her name became synonymous with shame. No one greeted her. Everyone avoided her. Meanwhile, my daughter and I lived in a simple hotel far from the noise. Every night before bed, I would open my notebook and complete what had become a demolition diary. I wrote calmly, accounts closed, marriage dead, family broken, business cleansed of parasites. It wasn't catharsis. It was a final ledger. My daughter would watch me in silence, as if she knew this ritual was what kept me steady. She, more mature than her years, would tell me that now we were finally free. And I believed her. I sold the house quickly, without looking back. There was no point in keeping a place that had been the stage for so much deceit. The few things we saved were my daughter's belongings and some documents. Everything else, the photos, the furniture, the clothes, was left behind. It was a way of amputating the past, even if it hurt. As I signed the closing papers, I felt a strange liberation, as if by handing over those keys, I was also locking the last door that tied me to her. My wife, without a job or a home, was left to wander from one friend's house to another, trying to find someone to take her in. With her lover and my brother caught in the judicial system, My role was no longer that of an avenger, but of a witness. I was called to testify several times. I brought my notebook, the recordings, and all the documents. The prosecutors looked at me with a kind of respect. They understood that my meticulousness had been the key to uncovering the entire network. I didn't feel like a hero or a martyr, just a man who had refused to sink in silence. My brother sent messages through his lawyers, offering deals, but I never responded. There was nothing left to negotiate. He had destroyed everything himself. Today, sitting in this hotel room, as my daughter reviews her notes for college, I feel a peace I had forgotten existed. Vengeance didn't give me back my marriage, or my family, or the lost years, but it gave me back something more valuable, my dignity. I didn't seek reconciliation or cheap forgiveness. What I did was tear out the rot by its roots and start over. My daughter is with me in this reconstruction. We both know the road won't be easy, but it will be clean. And in a world like this, sometimes destroying everything is the only way to rebuild on a firm foundation.